Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live took a shocking turn when legendary actor Harrison Ford walked off set following an explosive confrontation with host Jimmy Kimmel over Hollywood politics and cancel culture. The atmosphere in the studio felt different from the moment Harrison Ford walked onto the set. The 81-year-old Hollywood legend, known for his no-nonsense attitude and iconic roles as Han Solo and Indiana Jones, carried himself with his usual stoic demeanor. But there was something in his eyes that suggested this wouldn't be just another promotional appearance. Jimmy Kimmel, flashing his trademark grin, welcomed Ford to thunderous applause from the studio audience. Harrison Ford, everybody, the man, the myth, the legend, Kimmel announced, his voice carrying that familiar late-night host enthusiasm that had made him a household name. Ford settled into the guest chair with his characteristic understated presence, offering a polite nod to the audience before turning his attention to Kimmel. The initial pleasantries went smoothly enough. Discussion about Ford's latest project, a few light-hearted anecdotes about working with various directors, and the obligatory stories about his famous on-set injuries that had become part of his public persona. But, as the interview progressed, Kimmel began steering the conversation toward territory that would prove to be a minefield. You know, Harrison, you've been in this business for over 5 decades. You've seen Hollywood change dramatically. What do you think about how the industry handles controversial figures these days? Ford's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, his jaw tightening slightly. What do you mean by that, Jimmy? Kimmel leaned back in his chair, his smile taking on a more calculated edge. Well, we've seen a lot of actors face consequences for things they've said or done. Some people call it accountability. Others call it cancel culture. You've always been pretty outspoken about your political views. Do you ever worry about saying the wrong thing? The question hung in the air for a moment too long. Ford's hands, resting on the arms of his chair, seemed to grip slightly tighter. I think people should be able to express their opinions without fear of having their careers destroyed by a mob mentality, he replied carefully. Kimmel's eyebrows rose slightly, sensing an opportunity. That's interesting. So, you think some of the people who faced consequences maybe didn't deserve it? I mean, we're talking about some pretty serious allegations in some cases. I'm talking about the principle of the thing, Ford said, his voice maintaining its characteristic gravelly tone, but with an underlying tension. There's a difference between holding people accountable for genuine wrongdoing and destroying someone's livelihood because they expressed an unpopular opinion or made a mistake years ago. The studio audience, which had been periodically chuckling at Kimmel's jokes throughout the evening, grew noticeably quieter. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the conversation was taking an unexpected turn. Kimmel pressed further, his journalist instincts seemingly overriding his role as entertainer. But Harrison, don't you think that people in positions of influence like actors and celebrities have a responsibility to be careful about what they say, especially when it comes to sensitive topics? Ford's eyes narrowed slightly. Careful according to whom? You? The Twitter mob? Some corporate boardroom? His voice remained controlled, but there was steel beneath it now. I've been in this business since before you were born, Jimmy. I've seen trends come and go, and I've seen good people destroyed by hysteria. I wouldn't call holding people accountable for hate speech hysteria, Kimmel shot back, his own tone becoming more pointed. When someone uses their platform to spread harmful ideologies or make discriminatory comments, shouldn't there be consequences? The tension in the studio was palpable now. Camera operators continued filming, but several crew members exchanged glances. In the control room, producers were likely debating whether to cut to commercial. Ford leaned forward slightly, his legendary intensity now fully focused on his host. And who decides what constitutes hate speech, Jimmy? You? The network executives? Some algorithm designed by 20-some programmers in Silicon Valley? He paused, letting the question hang. Or maybe it's decided by talk show hosts who think they're arbiters of moral authority. The comment hit like a physical blow. Kimmel's practiced smile faltered for just a moment, replaced by something harder. I think most reasonable people can recognize hate speech when they see it. Harrison, we're not talking about complex philosophical debates here. We're talking about basic human decency. Basic human decency, Ford repeated, his voice carrying a tone that suggested he found the phrase inadequate. That's a convenient phrase, isn't it? Broad enough to mean whatever you want it to mean. The audience was now completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't the usual playful back and forth between host and guest. This was something raw and real, and it was happening live on national television. Kimmel, perhaps realizing he was losing control of the interview, attempted to regain his footing. Look, I think we can all agree that racism, sexism, and bigotry are wrong. When public figures promote those things, they should face consequences. That's not controversial. That's just— There you go again, Ford interrupted, his voice cutting through Kimmel's words like a blade. Defining the terms of the debate to suit your narrative. Kimmel's face flushed slightly, his professional composure beginning to crack. I'm not defining anything, Harrison. I'm just pointing out that there are consequences for harmful behavior. That's how society works. Society? Ford's laugh was dry and humorless. Or is it how your particular corner of Hollywood works? Because last I checked, society includes people who don't live in Malibu mansions and don't get their worldview from entertainment industry groupthink. The comment struck a nerve. Kimmel's smile disappeared entirely, replaced by barely contained irritation. That's rich coming from someone who's made millions playing characters that gun down bad guys without consequence. Maybe you're just upset because the real world has more nuance than your movies. Ford's eyes flashed dangerously. Don't lecture me about nuance, Jimmy. And don't pretend that what you do here is anything more than performance art designed to make your audience feel superior to people they've never met. Performance art? Kimmel's voice rose slightly, his careful host persona slipping further. I'm trying to have honest conversations about real issues. Maybe that makes you uncomfortable because you've spent so long hiding behind fictional characters. The studio felt electric now, charged with tension that had everyone on edge. Camera operators zoomed in instinctively, sensing they were capturing something historic. In the audience, people were pulling out phones, though security would later confiscate the footage. Ford stood up slowly, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow across Kimmel's desk. Hiding behind characters? That's what you think I do? His voice carried decades of gravitas, the same intensity that had made him one of cinema's most compelling leading men. Let me tell you something about hiding, Jimmy. At least when I play a character, I'm honest about it. I don't pretend to be something I'm not. Kimmel remained seated, but leaned forward aggressively. What's that supposed to mean? It means you sit behind that desk every night, pretending to be some kind of moral authority, when really you're just another entertainer desperate for applause, Ford replied, his words cutting through the studio silence like glass. You take complex issues and reduce them to punchlines and applause breaks. You create divisions where there could be understanding. I create divisions? Kimmel's voice cracked slightly, his composure finally breaking. I'm not the one defending people who spread hate and discrimination. I'm not the one making excuses for bigotry. Ford's hands clenched at his sides. There you go again. Anyone who disagrees with your worldview is automatically a bigot. Anyone who questions your methods is defending hate. It's a neat little trick, isn't it? Shut down debate by painting your opponents as monsters. The tension in the studio was unlike anything a late-night audience had ever witnessed. The usual rhythm of banter, jokes, and applause had dissolved into an atmosphere thick with confrontation. Even those watching from the farthest rows could feel the electricity in the air as Harrison Ford stood tall over Jimmy Kimmel, refusing to back down. Kimmel, visibly rattled but unwilling to surrender his ground, straightened in his chair and tried to reassert his authority. This isn't about shutting down debate, Harrison. It's about making sure people in positions of influence don't normalize harmful rhetoric. Words matter. They have consequences. Ford leaned over the desk slightly, his voice calm but sharp. Of course words matter, but when you decide which words are acceptable and which are forbidden, you're not protecting people, you're controlling them. That's not accountability, Jimmy. That's censorship dressed up as virtue. The audience, hushed and tense, seemed frozen in place. A few brave souls clapped tentatively at Ford's statement, but the sound quickly died in the heavy silence. Kimmel shook his head, a wry smile flickering back across his face, though it carried none of the warmth it usually did. You're telling me you think it's censorship when people face consequences for saying racist or sexist things? Come on, you can't really believe that. Ford's eyes narrowed again. What I believe is that the line between accountability and mob justice gets blurrier every year. People's lives are destroyed over comments made decades ago, sometimes in jest, sometimes out of ignorance. Are we supposed to erase every person who ever made a mistake? Or do we allow for growth, forgiveness, and the possibility that people can change? That struck a chord with part of the audience. A small wave of applause broke out this time, more confident and sustained, though it was quickly drowned by the awkward silence of those unsure which side they were supposed to take. Kimmel raised his voice to cut through the noise. There's a difference between a mistake and outright hate, Harrison. If you can't see that, then maybe you're more out of touch with reality than I thought. Ford's posture stiffened, his expression hardening as though he had been waiting for that very accusation. Out of touch? You think living in this bubble of Hollywood makes you in touch? You lecture your viewers every night as though you've got the moral high ground, but what do you really know about the world outside this studio? About the people who don't have your platform, your money, your safety net? The words hit Kimmel like a punch, and his professional mask slipped further. That's rich coming from you, he fired back. You've spent your life making millions off blockbuster franchises. Don't pretend you're some voice of the common man. Ford took a deliberate step back, his towering presence still dominating the space. I never claimed to be, but I don't insult people's intelligence by pretending I'm their moral compass. I make movies. I tell stories. That's my job. Your job, at least what it should be, is to entertain, not to sit here and wag your finger at anyone who doesn't fall in line with whatever the outrage of the week is. The studio audience was riveted, eyes darting between Ford's stern glare and Kimmel's strained composure. Every second felt historic, as though the show had ceased being entertainment and become a genuine ideological battlefield. In the control booth, producers gestured frantically, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the exchange play out. Kimmel, perhaps sensing the situation was slipping out of his control entirely, tried to steer the conversation toward safer ground. All right, Harrison, let's take a step back. Surely we can agree that society needs standards. Without them, where do we draw the line? Do we just let anyone say anything, no matter how cruel or destructive? Ford's response was measured but forceful. I'm saying that those standards should be built on reason and fairness, not fear and mob rule. The moment people are more afraid of losing their careers than they are of being honest, we've lost something essential. Debate dies, art dies, freedom dies. His words hung heavy in the studio. Even Kimmel seemed momentarily at a loss. He opened his mouth to respond, then paused, caught off guard by the conviction in Ford's voice. The silence stretched long enough for the audience to begin murmuring, the tension spilling into nervous whispers. Finally, Kimmel leaned back and exhaled sharply. So what? You think cancel culture is the greatest threat to freedom? Bigger than actual hate? Bigger than injustice? Bigger than violence? Ford didn't hesitate. It's not about bigger or smaller. It's about what it does to the culture. Fear silences people. It stops them from asking questions, from challenging assumptions, from speaking the truth as they see it. And when truth becomes dangerous, lies fill the vacuum. The line landed with a weight that silenced even the whispers in the audience. Kimmel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly stung by the force of Ford's conviction. For a brief moment, it looked as though he might abandon the debate altogether. But then his face hardened, and he pressed on. "You're giving cover to people who hurt others, Harrison. Don't you see that? When you frame it as just fear of speaking out, you ignore the victims of hateful speech, the people who live with the consequences every day." Ford shook his head slowly. "No, Jimmy, I'm saying you don't get to conflate disagreement with hate. You don't get to destroy someone's life over a clumsy joke or an unpopular opinion. If someone commits a crime, hold them accountable. But don't act like every misstep is a crime. That's not justice. That's vengeance." The audience, polarized now, split audibly. Some clapped and cheered Ford's words, while others hissed and booed. The sound created a strange, fractured atmosphere, a studio audience divided against itself in real time. Kimmel raised his hands in mock surrender, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "So what's your solution then, Harrison? No consequences for anyone? Just let it all slide?" Ford's reply came instantly, his gravelly voice cutting through the noise. "My solution is balance. Accountability should mean addressing the harm, not erasing the person. We need to teach, not destroy. Otherwise, we become exactly what we claim to oppose: intolerant, unforgiving, and self-righteous." For a moment, Kimmel sat silently, his expression unreadable. The audience waited, hanging on the edge of what might come next. But instead of offering a rebuttal, he forced a smile, clearly straining to regain his host persona. "Well, folks, this wasn't exactly the conversation I thought we'd be having tonight." Laughter rippled through the audience, though it was nervous, uncertain. Ford didn't laugh. He remained standing, his presence dominating the room. After a long pause, he finally muttered, "Maybe it's the conversation you needed to have." With that, he turned toward the exit. The audience gasped as Ford walked off set, his tall frame moving deliberately toward the backstage door. Cameras followed him until producers abruptly cut the feed to commercial, the screen fading to black with jarring suddenness. When the show returned, Kimmel sat alone at his desk, visibly unsettled. He tried to lighten the mood with a half-hearted joke, but the energy in the room had changed irreversibly. The audience clapped politely, but the spark was gone. In the hours that followed, social media exploded with clips and commentary. Some hailed Ford as a hero for speaking uncomfortable truths. Others accused him of excusing bigotry under the guise of free speech. Kimmel, too, found himself both praised and condemned. Praised for holding his ground, condemned for antagonizing a guest into walking off. What was clear, however, was that late-night television had never seen anything quite like it. Harrison Ford's walk-off would be remembered not as a publicity stunt or a passing controversy, but as a rare moment when Hollywood's glossy facade cracked wide open, revealing the raw, unresolved tensions beneath.